On a bitterly cold night in January 1919, a wall of molasses, yes, molasses, came roaring through the streets of Boston at 35 miles per hour, crushing buildings, drowning horses, and killing 21 people in one of the strangest industrial disasters in American history. It sounded impossible. It felt unreal. Yet it happened in the heart of a growing superpower, in a neighborhood filled with immigrants chasing the American dream. This is that story. The north end of Boston at the turn of the 20th century was crowded, noisy, and alive. Italian immigrants filled the narrow streets with the smell of garlic and bread. Dock workers hauled cargo from ships arriving from the Caribbean. Children ran between brick tenements, shouting in accents their parents brought from Naples, Sicily, and Genoa. America promised opportunity, but it did not promise safety. Towering over Commercial Street stood a massive steel tank, 50 feet tall and 90 feet wide. It held 2.3 million gallons of molasses, thick, dark syrup shipped from Puerto Rico. The tank belonged to the United States Industrial Alcohol Company, which used molasses to produce ethanol. Ethanol meant industrial chemicals. It also meant munitions. World War I had just ended 2 months earlier, and demand for industrial alcohol had surged during the war. The company had rushed to build the tank in 1915 to cash in on wartime profits. Rushed was the key word. The tank leaked almost from the beginning. Neighbors would later testify that children collected dripping molasses in pails. The steel plates were too thin, rivets were poorly installed. Workers complained about groaning sounds as the tank expanded and contracted with temperature changes. Instead of fixing it properly, the company painted the tank brown to hide the leaks. January 15, 1919, began unusually warm. Temperatures rose above 40 degrees Fahrenheit after a cold snap. That morning, a fresh shipment of molasses had been pumped into the tank, mixing with colder syrup already inside. Fermentation produced gas, increasing pressure. The tank trembled. At 12:40 p.m., it exploded. Witnesses described a sound like machine gun fire as rivets shot into the air. Steel plates peeled apart. Then came the wave, a 15-foot-high wave of molasses, moving faster than a man could run. It smashed the nearby firehouse, collapsing its walls. It lifted a freight train off its tracks. Buildings splintered as if struck by artillery. People did not understand what was happening. Some thought it was a bomb. Others believed a boiler had exploded. The wave engulfed men, women, and children. Molasses, at that volume and speed, behaves like a liquid wall. Victims were hurled against structures or trapped under debris. Horses struggled, legs thrashing, before being suffocated. Rescue was almost impossible. The syrup quickly cooled and thickened in the winter air. It clung to skin and clothing. Rescuers waded in waist-deep, trying to pull people free, only to become stuck themselves. Firefighters used seawater to wash away the molasses, but the mixture only spread further across the neighborhood. The death toll reached 21. More than 150 were injured. Some drowned in molasses. Others died from crushed skulls or internal injuries. A young boy, playing near the tank, never made it home. A fire captain was pinned beneath rubble. A teamster and his horse were swallowed whole. In the aftermath, the streets looked like a battlefield coated in brown sludge. It took weeks to clean the area. Harbor waters turned sticky. Residents claimed that on hot days for years afterward, the smell of molasses rose from the pavement. But the physical destruction was only part of the story. The legal battle that followed would change American corporate accountability forever. The United States Industrial Alcohol Company immediately tried to control the narrative. Executives suggested anarchists had planted a bomb. 1919 was the beginning of the Red Scare. Fear of radicals was spreading across the country. It was a convenient explanation. Immigrant neighborhoods were often blamed for unrest. However, survivors and families of the victims were not convinced. A lawsuit was filed, one of the first major class action suits in American history. More than 100 plaintiffs sued the company. The case dragged on for nearly 6 years. Thousands of pages of testimony were collected. Engineers analyzed steel samples. Experts debated fluid dynamics. Ordinary dock workers found themselves part of a landmark legal struggle. The trial revealed shocking details. The tank had never been properly tested with water before being filled with molasses. Basic safety inspections were skipped. The engineer who designed it lacked formal credentials in structural engineering. Rivets were shown to be too weak to handle internal pressure. Internal memos suggested the company knew about the leaks and structural weaknesses. Instead of investing in reinforcement, they prioritized production speed. War contracts meant profit. Delays meant lost money. In 1925, the court ruled against the company. It was found responsible for the disaster due to negligence. The company paid nearly $1 million in damages, equivalent to tens of millions today. The case set an important precedent. It demonstrated that corporations could be held liable for poor engineering and unsafe construction. In an era when industrial giants dominated American life, this was significant. It contributed to stricter building codes and oversight in Boston and beyond. Yet the disaster faded from national memory. It lacked the drama of a war or the spectacle of a political assassination. It was strange, almost absurd. A flood of molasses did not fit neatly into heroic narratives. But for the North End, it was unforgettable. The neighborhood rebuilt. The tank was never reconstructed. In its place, decades later, a baseball field would stand. Children once again played on the ground where syrup had swallowed lives. History layered itself quietly beneath the soil. The Great Molasses Flood, as it became known, revealed something deeper about America in the early 20th century. It exposed the tension between rapid industrial growth and human safety. The United States was transforming into a global economic powerhouse. Factories rose quickly, infrastructure expanded at breakneck speed, regulation often lagged behind ambition. Immigrants who formed the backbone of industrial labor bore the risks. They worked long hours under dangerous conditions. When accidents happened, blame frequently shifted away from powerful companies. In 1919, prohibition was looming. The 18th Amendment would soon outlaw alcohol. Ironically, the tank that burst had been storing the raw ingredient for industrial alcohol. Within a year, ethanol production for beverages would become illegal, though industrial use would continue. The country was entering a moral experiment, even as it struggled with industrial modernity. The molasses flood sits at the intersection of these forces: immigration, industrial capitalism, wartime production, fear of radicals, and the birth of modern regulatory law. For historians, it offers a case study in corporate negligence. For legal scholars, it marks a milestone in mass tort litigation. For engineers, it remains an example of structural failure caused by cost-cutting and inadequate design. For ordinary Americans, it is a reminder that disaster does not always come in expected forms. Sometimes it arrives sticky and sweet, disguised as something harmless. Even today, visitors to Boston's North End can find a small plaque marking the site. It does not look like the scene of one of the strangest catastrophes in American urban history. Tourists walk past, heading towards Italian bakeries or historic trails tied to the American Revolution. Few pause to imagine a 15-foot wave of syrup tearing through the streets. But if you close your eyes, you can almost hear it. The metallic groan, the cracking rivets, the roar of collapsing steel. And then silence, broken only by cries for help in a neighborhood that came to America seeking opportunity, not tragedy. The Great Molasses Flood remains astonishing not because of its absurdity, but because it reveals how fragile progress can be when profit outruns responsibility. It is a story of engineering failure, legal transformation, immigrant resilience, and the unpredictable nature of industrial America. History often remembers wars and presidents, yet sometimes the most revealing moments come from events that seem unbelievable. A wave of molasses racing through Boston at the speed of a train